This episode of Moist Meter brought to you by GodSlap Issue 2. Go to godslapbook.com to order your copy now.
Initiating moisture.
Happy New Year! Welcome back to the Moisties. Today we're looking at the 5 worst games of 2022. Some real big stinkers that just make you go, PU, that's smelly. And 2022 gave us some very impressive bad games. So let's kick it off. At number 5, we have Dark Pictures Anthology Devil in Me. This one actually hits close to home. This one actually really hurts my soul, because this is a tradition on my streams to play through all the Dark Pictures games with Jackson. We do it every time there's a new release. It's become just a yearly tradition, and it's always fun. The games are never the best games ever made or anything like that, but they're always enjoyable. They have campiness, goofiness, self-awareness, just a really enjoyable experience. But not this time. It seems like the Grinch stole more than Christmas this year. They stole all of the talent from the development team because they released a completely broken and borderline unplayable co-op experience. This game made Pokemon Scarlet and Violet look like a polished $60 masterpiece. I don't know what went wrong. It's the same engine, everything. They didn't reinvent the genre or change anything. They just completely fumbled it super hard. There's moments in this game where we got soft locked, I think it was 4 times in total, where we couldn't progress at all and had to hard restart the game. Literally close out of the game, reopen it, and then lose all of that progress and getting back. There's also times where the camera would lock up in a position where you couldn't move it anymore. So then you'd have to have this isometric camera view, which is a bug, by the way, and you couldn't actually see any of the interactables you were supposed to touch, so you couldn't progress because of that, which again required a hard restart in order to fix it. Now, apparently these were co-op only problems, and there was actually not as many bugs and glitches in a solo experience, but it's still inexcusable because these games are kind of catered to being a 2-player experience. You both go off on your own paths that always converge and you work together, and it's just like watching a movie together, but you get to influence it to a certain degree. I love the Dark Pictures Anthology. I think it's a great series of games, but they really fucked it up with Devil in Me. And it's a shame because I actually think it's their most interesting setting yet. Going through H.H. Holmes stuff, the first serial killer, and the saw traps almost. There's just so much that was interesting. The setup was great, and the narrative was fun too. But it couldn't really be played effectively with Jackson and I. It didn't function half the time, which led to a massive headache, because then you'd have to go back and reset all the progress after the hard restart. It was just a remarkably frustrating disappointment. Now, moving on to number 4, we have Saints Row. Man, what can be said about Saints Row that hasn't already been said about a festering pile of dog shit on the sidewalk? There is almost nothing to like about this game unless you like absolutely cringe dialogue that never relents and it just never stops coming. It is miserable, both to listen to and to play. The gameplay feels incredibly dated. I felt like I was playing something out of 2008, and everything around it is just a tedious chore. Every mission is cookie cutter. There's nothing fun about it. The cutscenes were kind of enjoyable from time to time because they weren't afraid to be over the top with their action moments, but there's so few of those, and most of the cutscenes are just the characters talking at each other, talking about student loan debt and shit like that, and fuck this. Oh, that's a lot of poop shit. It's a bad experience all across the board. If you're looking for a good story, you won't find it. If you're looking for gameplay, you certainly won't find it. And the shtick of being carefree and goofy wears off almost immediately. Plus, it doesn't even do what Saints Row is known for, which is getting really zany with weaponry and stuff. There's no dildo bats in this game like I was expecting. There's nothing necessarily even crude in the game anymore. It's all just what I feel deviant art would have found to be somewhat edgy 10 years ago. Or Tumblr, maybe. It's just completely missing the mark. I don't know what happened here. I would expect the gameplay to not be amazing. I don't think Saints Row's ever had stellar gameplay, but it was carried by the freedom to do silly stuff. The unapologetic freedom to be wacky. That's not here. Your options for doing silly things are severely limited. There's not a lot of it. It's just a very boring, bland, not fun experience. At number 3, we have Diablo Immortal. You all have phones, don't you? good, because we're gonna squeeze every last dollar we can out of your saved credit card information on that phone. The greediest monetization model of any game I have ever seen in my life. I didn't actually get into the game. I did give it a bit of a whirl just to see how truly awful the greed was, but I've heard the game itself wasn't bad. It's just how it was monetized and how the monetization actually affected the game going forward. But even if the core gameplay was fine, it can't be forgiven just how greedy this shit was. Plus, it's pretty clear the main goal with Diablo Immortal was to be a lucrative financial project that only strives to make as much money as it can from the customer, squeeze as many doubloons out of each individual player as they could, as opposed to making a good game that they could also make money on. It was only about printing money, farming customers, and then a game tacked on to that idea. I and many others have already made videos breaking down just how bad Diablo Immortal's monetization was, so I'm not going to be getting too deep into the weeds of it here. I don't know if it's changed now, but it also doesn't matter, because it's not something that can be overlooked with the state that it shipped in. It was very clearly just exploiting customers. That shit was more exploitative than like a secret crypto miner installed onto a PC after downloading a Steam game. It was just so unethical. It would incentivize heavily and pretty much like push players as hard as possible to spend money on the game constantly. You could spend tens of thousands of dollars on that game and still not even be at the highest level of pay to win that it offered. It was so fucked up. Just an absolutely blatant greed machine. So that's why Diablo Immortal's here. And now for the runner-up for the worst game of the year. In second place for bad games, it's Gungrave Gore taking home the silver. This is a game I don't think many of you have played or ever heard of, but I tried it, and wow, this was something special. Playing this game felt like playing the idea of a game back in 1985. Like, it had the most basic gameplay elements where it's like pressing one button over and over and over and over again and nothing else, and then like occasionally you do other buttons but you didn't need to. It's just a fucking awful game. It had a really cool intro cutscene, it has a really cool style, and they have like a full like animation thing in the beginning that's really great. But then after that, they clearly blew their load there. The entire budget went to the first 15 minutes of visuals and animation. After that, it falls so flat. Everything is so bad. But obviously the biggest problem is how bad the gameplay is. I'm not kidding. You just press one button. Or you can just press one button over and over again. There's like deflection mechanics, but you don't really need them. It doesn't really matter. You build up a combo by just breaking things through pressing one button. You do have like abilities, but they kind of fucking suck. You're still better off just pressing the one button, the shoot button, and nothing else. The game looks like it should be a hack and slash with combos, but there's no combos. Your melee is like 3 attacks, I think. You just do 3 attacks. 1, 2, 3. That's it, forever. And then everything else is just shooting. Normal shooting. Not interesting shooting. Auto lock on kind of shooting. It's bad. Like, I can't stress enough. It makes Saints Row gameplay look innovative. That's how bad Gungrave Gore's gameplay is. Alright, so after hearing all that, you're probably wondering what could possibly be worse than Gungrave Gore. You naive fool. It seems you haven't heard of the biggest flop since The Culling 2. It came out this year by none other than Platinum Games, one of my personal favorite developers, a developer whose name always meant highest quality production until very recently, unfortunately. They released a game that had an all-time peak of 1,166 players. This is for a big budget release. This is not some random obscure indie game. This is a Platinum Games game, which is a very prestigious studio, and it only ever had 1,100 players. And within a week was down to less than 10. It was a live service game, which doesn't bode well these days. A lot of live service games are just doomed for failure, just literally dead on arrival, buried 6 feet deep by the time they release. And it's a little game called Babylon's Fall. This is the worst game of 2022 by far. It is a colossal failure on every possible front. It fails as a live service game, and it fails in every department of what makes a video game enjoyable. Even just from its visuals, everything is very clearly half-baked and unfinished. They put a fucking filter on the game, like an actual Snapchat filter for like effects. So like they'll have a like ink blots or whatever in order to make it look stylistic, but it's clearly there just because they were too lazy to program things like rain or whatever. So they just have little fucking filters throughout the game, and it is an eyesore. It is disorienting. It feels like when you play this game that you're on the verge of passing out. Like it feels like your vision is narrowing and getting blurry just from looking at the screen when you're playing Babylon's Fall. But you're never playing Babylon's Fall to begin with. No one ever did. You like when this game came out, I couldn't play with anyone except friends who also were playing it as a joke to see how bad it was. There was never a community for this game, and for good reason. It wasn't just a game that flew under the radar but was okay, like passable. It was a game that flew under the radar that sucked fuck. It was terrible. Absolutely horrible. Every quest, every mission was just the same thing over and over and over again. Repeated ad nauseum. There was no interesting content. It was just the same reused, recycled content, dungeons, whatever. All of it used a million times, and it just sucked. It was so bad. I'm having a hard time finding enough descriptive words to explain the experience of playing Babylon's Fall. Like, words pale to the feeling of playing something so atrocious. It was so easy to choose the worst game of the year because there is an objectively correct answer. It's Babylon's Fall. There is no game that came out this year, AAA or indie, that is as bad or as big of a failure as Babylon's Fall. So that concludes the top 5 worst games of 2022 Moisties. That's about it. GodSlap is a comic book series we've been working on for a couple years now. It's a hyper-violent, over-the-top sci-fi story about the beauty and destruction that slaps can cause. Issue 2 is out right now. It'd make a wonderful Christmas gift, so make sure to check it out at GodSlapBook.com. Right now we also have 3 variant covers that are in stock, but the second those sell out, those variant covers will never be restocked, so definitely make sure to pick up a copy today.